Hi, this is Sam Botstein from MachineSkills.com. Make sure to check us out at MachineSkills.com and subscribe on YouTube for all our machine tutorials. Today we're going to take a look at how to use the Compressor, Transient Master, and the grid turned off in order to dial in exactly the right feel on a house groove. It's going to work a little bit the same way in hip-hop. In hip-hop, the focus would be more on the drums knocking, but leaving some room for the vocals, where in house it's all about keeping people dancing. So here's what the finished product might sound like. This is a really simple house beat. So the things that make this work are the Transient Master, the compressor, and the fact that I haven't just clicked these notes into the grid, I've turned the grid off and actually pulled them back. So to illustrate how important these things are, I'm going to talk about them, but first I'm going to work backwards and sort of put it back the way I had it at the beginning. So we're going to come in and out of hearing the Transient Master, and we're going to come in and out of hearing the compressor, and then we're going to move all the notes back onto the grid to see sort of the difference. So let's do that now. As you can see, this is significantly more lame than what we heard at the beginning. And the reason is basically that this offbeat shaker sounds very off, and the 2 and the 4 are really weak because all the sounds are layered up right on top of each other. The transients all start at the same time. So a really quick tip to get the house beat right is to turn this grid off. You can also accomplish this through playing it in on your machine controller, of course, or you could do it via the groove effects. But of course, the groove effects and what I'm about to show you are, unlike polyrhythm or some sort of theoretical music thing, are all dependent on the tempo. So what we're going to do now is going to work at 128, but even at 129, it's going to be, slightly off, and we definitely want to get it just right so that when it's performed by a DJ and he's beat matching and bringing it up, let's say between plus and minus 8%, we want it to be something that still sounds good even when we've moved around the tempo quite a bit by pitching around the record. Also, of course, the way that the tempo works in Maschine is quite a bit different than the way that a turntable turns the tempo up and down. It's not actually pitching up all the notes and everything. But anyway, let's get to it, and I'll show this limitation in just 1 second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this grid off by pressing this hashtag pound key symbol, and then I'm going to select the notes that I'm going to move off the grid. I'm going to start by moving the clap and the snare at the same time. Then I'm going to actually probably bring the clap in behind the snare to isolate the 3 different sounds, the kick, the snare, and the clap. So let's do that. And when I do this, I always have the sequencer running so I can hear the results in real time. So this sounds pretty good to me, especially when we bring in a Transient Master and we're able to accentuate the attack a little bit. As you can see, this is really very powerful. One issue with doing it this way is that it's very dependent on the tempo. So if I bring the tempo up a little bit, let's say, low 130s, it's going to be really weird. It's because now these are all hitting actually much closer in terms of, objective time than they were at a slower tempo. It'll also be out if I go too low, let's say below 120. To me, I can almost hear the clap and then the snare and then the kick so separately at this tempo that it's a little bit funky. But right around, house tempo, 128, 129, it should be pretty okay. So this technique is really quick and it works. One thing that's still sort of standing out to me and isn't quite the way I'd like it to be is the shaker. So this second shaker hit just doesn't feel like it hits with the rest of the groove at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same technique and I'm just going to bring it a little bit closer until it sounds right. So this really did a lot. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the sort of channel strips on these individual sounds. So on the kick we have a compressor and an EQ. I like the kick to be pretty tightened up and to use a lot of compression, especially in this kind of music. So we have the amount real high, we have the threshold not crazily low, because when you bring the threshold too low on a kick drum like this, it's going to lose a lot of its character, and I'll show you what I mean right now. Let me just turn the transient master off so it's not affecting what we're hearing. So when I bring it really extremely low like that, it's going to sort of lose its punch and become more like a bouncing ball than any kind of kick drum. But down here between -10, -20, let's say, I think it was at 15.6, is a really nice sweet spot. Obviously, it's going to depend on the specific kick sound you're using, but I like these particular settings you see here. I like the attack at about 10, 11 o'clock, the release at about 10, 11 o'clock, and a lot of compression, large amounts. In terms of the EQ, this is pretty standard kick stuff, but on the snare, we have some different things going on. So the knee is a lot lower. So on the kick compressor, we have it up at 81%, but on the snares compressor, we have it way down here, and we have actually 100%. We're not letting any bleed through. It's 100% compressed. The EQ actually emphasizes low mid more than I thought it would from my memory, but it's, again, a little standard. We definitely want to make some room for the kick down here. In terms of the clap, we have an EQ and we have a creative effect, the reso chord. This helps out the sound a little bit in this particular case, but the EQ is the big thing, that basically it's going to be confined towards the higher registers. So what we actually have in effect through our EQing is we sort of have, on the approach to the second and the fourth beats, we have first the high frequencies coming in, followed by the mids and then the lows of the kick, which is really effective. Now on the group, we're going to use a compressor and then a transient master. On the compressor, I definitely recommend something that's not too extreme, but here I actually have the amount really high, and the attack and the release are more important here than they are in the individual sounds because they're affecting much more. We can sort of get away with some sins here through using transient master, but I think that this is potentially really important. Of course, we have the option, if we have a bass sound going on some other group, to use the sidechain. Now, in the transient master, I like to use the limiter, otherwise some really funky things can happen. I almost always leave the input gain the way that it is. I'm sure that you can get an interesting spectrum if you start moving that around wildly, but I never really go north or south of about 3 dB on this input control. I usually turn up the attack and leave the sustain somewhere between, let's say, like 30 and 70. It sounds interesting when you pull it all the way up. It can almost verge on reverb territory when you bring the sustain all the way up. So the parameters that really lend the character to this beat are the attack and sustain of the Transient Master, the attack and release of the compressor on the group, and then the specific lead-in time that these clap and snare sounds are off of the beat, how far ahead they are. Those are the things that really define this kind of house beat. Let me know if this works for you in your house productions. Make sure to check us out at machineskills.com and subscribe on YouTube for all our machine tutorials.